Thing is, the lizards. Okay, lizards been around a long time, like since before ancient Egypt and everything. And the symbol, that eye, the eye of Horus with the squiggly hanging out of it,
Yeah.
that has to do with lizards. It's a lizard symbol. It means two things. It's a pro-lizard symbol, and it also means beware, there's lizards here. Okay, there's three different kinds of lizards. I'll tell you all about them. They're called vril. The thing is, I'm not sure if it's one L or two at the end. It's vril, Vrill, or Vril. Germans were into them. They had a club with vril things. Anyway, there's like a 1 to 1.5 foot tall one. That's the vril type one. It's got scales, red scales. There's a type two that is not parasitic, but it's still vicious, nasty, carnivorous. They're all carnivorous. And there's a type three that's 8 feet tall that has a real long neck and looks like a gray alien, but it comes from deep, deep, deep underground. Like below deep base deep. Like they need a methane oxygen mix to breathe, and deep underground they got sulfur pools, I guess, that make this stuff. Anyway, they come up underneath the domed bases. The government is complicit with them, basically. Now I have to tell you about the parasitic aspect of the lizards and why the Illuminati and the governments use them, okay? I'm saying this in a nutshell because it's very important. I want to get it all out on your show. Nobody's going to say this for fear of clone torture, remote-controlled death, or death by lizards 1,000 times until you die by a heart attack or something. But I figured I have to tell people because, well, they're getting me there anyway. They eased up lately, asking me not to talk about it anymore, but I'm just going to. Well, the lizards have a thing, okay? They have what's called a proboscis. There's lizards out there today that have a proboscis on their face, okay? These things got it in the middle of their head, okay? And on the top of their head, this is the vril type 1 and 2. The type 2 have a proboscis sheath that comes out, it sticks out. The type 1s, for instance, it's like a chocolate chip, it looks like, basically the tip of it. Now, one point in these things' lives, because they have a long lifespan, the lizard species, one point in their life, they can slowly wiggle this thing out, eject it, and it goes into somebody's eyeball, okay, another animal. Now, it wiggles in by the sense of taste. They described this to me so, like, when I was like 18 years old there, and told me about it different times throughout the years of going there. They can bring you there every single night if they want to, and they did bring me there every night. They laughed at me when I said I was going to tell the world about this. They said, nobody's ever going to believe me. You won't put it together in a eloquent way. People will think that technology isn't that advanced yet with cloning because they just clone the sheep, right? No. They've been cloning people a long time this way. Thing is, the lizard, okay, the thing squiggles in through the eye. It does a spiral around the optic nerve all the way to a certain point, and it's driven there by taste. And they said once it gets there, it has the taste of butterscotch, and then it does a feeling like holding your breath and going, pushing outwards. And at the tip of this chocolate chip, it then starts what they call sweating the quill. Now, the spinal cord stuff comes out of the spinal cord, out of the chocolate chip thingy, and it's everything that the lizard is. The lizard's whole body is dead. That little lizard thing is dead, and it can't go back in. Can't get back in. It's one way. Once it excretes this stuff, sweats this quill thing, the person's debilitated for an unknown amount of time. I don't know how long. But when they come back, they have to have some recovery time. But when they come back, they are not the person anymore. They are then the lizard. Let me put this to you flatly. The old person's consciousness is gone. The body is absolutely, totally dominated, and the lizard is smarter as a human then, and totally controls everything. Over time, it'll develop a rash, it'll lose its hair. Thing is, these things are all over the place, and they mimic human behavior. In fact, one of their names in the past is Mimic. a lot of the people that you hear about in the news that are getting people and chopping them up in the basement and eating them and stuff, frying them up, these are what they call drones. They're parasited hosts of the lizards. They like to make them. The only thing a drone wants to do is make more, have sex, and torture someone. Like, it's it's a different kind of mentality. It's hard to explain. When they at the cloning station, when they victimize someone, it gives them a powerful feeling, and it's the nerdy way, that nerdy aspect of it. Oh, I've got something over someone, but they do that to the extreme. Oh, and alien abductions. Let me tell you something. They videotape alien abductions. They set up alien abductions with Hollywood makeup and stuff. Like, not all of them. I can't say all of them. Some of them might be real for all I know. But I've seen the set. It's a really crappy looking saucer. You just walk up a ramp into it. They never see the outside of it. But they clone people, right? And then activate them when they're on the slab strapped down. Now someone goes in with a gray mask and the mask is made of chicken skin, okay? Just to give it that aspect of realism, dyed gray chicken skin, so it'll look real. And does it look real? Stretched over a mask, right? And they have the mask on. They go in at the lizard thing. They just totally take them over. They do it a lot. It used to be, it's a Luciferian thing. They said that these lizards were the sons of Satan or whatever, Lucifer or whatever. They're not, though. They're just a species of lizard that survived the extinction of the dinosaurs by being way, way underground. I'll just tell you, I know it sounds retarded. The damn things can talk, okay? But they don't have a tongue. I'll tell you about their mouths. It takes a while. Basically, they have a blood spike, okay? This is what they call a chupacabra, too. They come up from underground, different spots all over the world, right? Like worms out of a rotten apple, different spots, and then they infiltrate the society there. But the drones today have erased, well, of 100 years ago, erased any existence of these real lizards from, like, Egyptian carvings on walls. They would smash them, right? Or books that had anything in them about them, they would burn them. Because drones don't want to get found out and sent off and killed. Like, this is what I thought FEMA camps were for, rounding up drones, because they've been talking about it at the cloning center. This is where they discuss all political, worldly affairs. And they let me sit in, fly on the wall, because they figure nobody's going to ever believe me that they can clone anybody in. Everybody there is bored of it, the whole technology. It lost the novelty like 10 years ago, right? So they go there and they talk to Brad Pitt and let me tell you, all the celebrities, because they bring them there and they tell them, look, you're here, you're going to hang with us. If you don't want to, well, if they cry and make a fuss like Lauryn Hill from the Fugees, make a song about I Get Out and stuff, they let her not go to the cloning station. They don't activate her, let her have normal dreams. But other people, they really grill them to stay. And they say, if you ever talk about it, you're going to die. The reason Britney Spears went pop, do you want to know? Their one eye, that means two things. That means watch out, you don't get the lizard that stick the thing. Well, it means a couple different things to different people. It means like don't you only half see things, and I always figured it was the lizard in the eye thing. Well, the thing with the pyramid in the eye thing is the whole symbol is a joke. It's once you know what the pyramid is for, then you know when you're pretty much Illuminati. But I'm going to break that whole thing right now. I'm going to ruin it. You got to look on my page and look at the schematics for the pyramid. I explain what it's for. It was basically a vril trap. It's a giant cockroach trap for vrils, okay? These little vents that went in, they were at an angle. They were lined with smooth limestone, and anything that went in didn't come out because these crab nasties claws, well, that's what I call them, crab nasties, the vrils. I've been calling them that my whole life. They couldn't scramble back up and out. Yeah, you heard about the celebrities selling their souls to the place, so that's what they're doing. They're selling themselves to be used as clones at the cloning center. Now the thing is, after a while, they have kids, and they want to bring their kids there too to induct them into the family, right? They just want to perv on them, and they're all too scared to say no, and they do. host people, because the proboscis on young lizard type 1s.
For those unfamiliar, the Alexander Romance is a collection of stories and legends about the famous conqueror Alexander the Great. The collection has had many variants and has appeared in many different languages throughout the ages. This version tries to draw on all of them. The real Alexander was said to have lived in the 4th century BC, and was supposedly tutored by the famous Greek philosopher Aristotle. According to official historians, Alexander was a real king, that really did conquer large parts of the ancient world, and that really was tutored by the philosopher Aristotle. The official historians also state that the Alexander Romance is largely mythical nonsense and made-up fairy-tale stories. In fact, this is why it's called a romance. History books that don't fit official history because they are too outlandish get relabeled as romances. Even though the people who originally wrote and read these stories in bygone times never made such a distinction. So we have a situation where academics basically pick and choose which pieces of the written record to believe and which not to believe. In this case they are quite happy to believe that Alexander was tutored by the great Aristotle, but not that interested in believing that he had conversations with talking trees, one of the many strange events that occur in the Alexander Romance. Finally, though, I'll get to the Hollow Earth bits. The book contains one bit where it implicitly states that the Earth is round, then many other bits where it's implied that it's flat and has edges. I guess this is to be expected given that it's a composite of various tales and traditions. The mention of the Earth being round comes in a passage where the Persian king Darius mocks Alexander by sending him a ball, thus implying that Alexander is a child and should still be playing with toys. Alexander replies with the following statement: "I accepted the ball, as a sign that I shall be ruler of the world, for the world is spherical like a ball." This implies that whoever wrote this section of the story believed that the Earth was round. This would suggest that there were people that believed the Earth was round at least as early as the medieval period. It's just then a case of how old or authentic you believe these texts to actually be. The parts of the text that imply that the Earth is flat are much less clear, but they nevertheless conflict with the above passage. There are constant references to Alexander trying to reach the edge of the world, of course. This could be taken in a more symbolic sense though. There's also a passage where Alexander is carried high into the sky by a large bird and sees the entire world. "Look down on earth, Alexander." I looked down, somewhat afraid, and behold, I saw a great snake curled up, and in the middle of the snake a tiny circle like a threshing floor. A threshing floor is a floor, normally circular, that was used to separate out grain by the trampling of feet in days of yore. Then my companion said to me, "Point your spear at the threshing floor, for that is the world." The snake is the sea that surrounds the world. This visual image would imply that the world is a disk of land on a vast ocean, but again I guess it could be open to interpretation. A final thing I thought was worth mentioning concerned the continents of the world, and came in a bit about Alexander taking on the Amazons, the famed female warriors of Greek myth. Mention of the name Amazon of course makes most people think of the Amazon River in South America, however we are told by historians that these ancient Amazons dwelled somewhere completely different. This would obviously make complete sense given that the New World was only discovered by Europeans about 500 years ago, long after the ancient Amazons were said to exist. In fact, if I recall correctly, I think one story goes that the Amazon River was so named by European explorers because they encountered vicious female warriors along the river which reminded them of the Greek tales. However, setting conventional history aside for a moment, it's interesting to note how the country of the Amazons is described in the Alexander Romance. "We live in the hinterland across the river Amazon. Our country is completely encircled by a river, and it takes a year to travel around it. There is only one entrance." If you take encircled by a river to mean encircled by an ocean, then this would be a pretty decent description of the South American continent. A year to travel around it would certainly suggest a landmass of continent size. The one entrance possibly being the Isthmus of Panama in Middle America. In fact, somewhat coincidentally, the Isthmus of Panama is also known as the Isthmus of Darien, and the name Darien is said to derive from the Persian name Darius. As mentioned above, Darius is the Persian king that Alexander spends much of his time at war with in the book. The possible Amazon/South America link is strengthened in a later passage in the book where Alexander tells the Amazons, "We have made ourselves lord of the 3 continents and we have not failed to set up trophies of all our victories. It would be seen as shameful in us if we did not campaign against you too." With the 3 already conquered continents being Africa, Europe and Asia, this would suggest that the land of the Amazons lies somewhere else. Again, though, this is pretty heady speculation and I guess the text can be read numerous ways. Especially given that we're reading a translation of a work that has had so many variations down the years. It's still highly interesting though. Maybe all these works we attribute to the ancient and medieval world are much more recent than we think. I'm slowly becoming convinced that the official history we have of the world is very confused indeed. More evidence of hollow earth from the Muslim holy book the Quran. The identity of Dul-Qur'an has been a matter of theological controversy amongst Muslim scholars for centuries. Dul-Qur'an was equated with Alexander by the majority of classical Islamic scholars during a period when Christians and Jews had themselves co-opted Alexander the Great as a religious figure. However, it is clear that the historical Alexander the Great was a Greek pagan. For example, Alexander's mother Olympias is said to have been a devout member of the orgiastic snake-worshipping cult of Dionysus, and may have slept with snakes. Such historical facts about Alexander the Great became well known only after the Renaissance period, 1300–1600 AD, when the Anabasis Alexandriae, AD 86–160, was rediscovered. Dul-Qur'an, the 2-horned one in English, is a person described in the Quran, the sacred scripture believed by Muslims to have been revealed by Allah to Muhammad. The story of Dul-Qur'an appears in 17 short verses of the Quran, specifically verses 18, 83–99 of Surah Al-Kahf. Dul-Qur'an is mentioned in only one place in the Quran, unlike the more familiar stories that are repeated throughout the text. For example, Jesus is mentioned in 93 verses in 15 different surahs of the Quran. The Qur'anic story describes a man called Dul-Qur'an, meaning the 2-horned, who was already familiar to the inhabitants of the region, to whom Allah gave great power, and who traveled to a place where it appeared to him as if the sun was setting in a murky, or boiling, sea. At this place, Dul-Qur'an builds a wall in order to enclose the nations of Gog and Magog. It is thought that Gog and Magog will breach Dul-Qur'an's wall before Yawm al-Qiyamah, the Day of Judgment, and will wreak havoc in the world, Islamic Armageddon. Gog and Magog are mentioned in the Hebrew Bible as barbarian tribes to the north, who will one day invade the land of Israel. The Qur'an further mentions them, but claims that they will destroy the entire civilized world. Dul-Qur'an, bearer of the 2 horns, is a Qur'anic figure related to Gog and Magog, who is said to have built a wall to keep out those tribes. He's embellished as a great and just king. In 1889, the renowned scholar and philologist, Sir Ernest Alfred Wallace Budge, translated 5 Alexander stories from Syriac manuscripts into English. One of these stories was a legend that detailed the exploits of Alexander, the son of Philip the Macedonian, and how he traveled to the ends of the world, made a gate of iron, and shut behind it the Huns so they might not come forth to spoil the land. The parallels between this story and the story of Dul-Qur'an in the Qur'an are detailed below. 2 horns. Alexander in the Syriac legend is described as having horns on his head. An Ethiopic variation of the story refers to Alexander as the 2 horns. Coins depicting Alexander with ram horns on his head were first minted shortly after his death. By the 1st century BC, silver coins depicting Alexander with ram horns were used as the primary currency in Arabia. Imitation coins were issued by an Arab ruler named Abil who ruled in the southeastern region of the Arabian Peninsula, and other minting of these coins occurred throughout Arabia for another 1,000 years. This connection of Alexander with 2 horns was widely known across the region at the time. And King Alexander bowed himself and did reverence, saying, "Zero God, Lord of kings and judges, thou who settest up kings and destroyest their power, I know in my mind that thou hast exalted me above all kings, and thou hast made me horns upon my head, wherewith I might thrust down the kingdoms of the world." Journey to the Fetid Sea. The first destination for the hero in both the Syriac and Qur'anic stories is a place near the setting of the sun. The Syriac legend identifies this location as Ossos, a mythical sea believed to encircle a flat earth. In both accounts, the water is described as being muddy or fetid. As to the thing, my lord, which thy majesty, or thy greatness, desires to go and see, namely, upon what the heavens rest, and what surrounds the earth, the terrible seas which surround the world will not give thee a passage, because there are 11 bright seas, on which the ships of men sail, and beyond these there is about 10 miles of dry land, and beyond these 10 miles there is the fetid sea, Ossos, the ocean, which surrounds all creation. And they put ships to sea and sailed on the sea 4 months and 12 days, and they arrived at the dry land beyond the 11 bright seas. Quran 1. Such way he followed, until, when he reached the setting of the sun, he found it set in a spring of murky water. Near it he found a people. We said, O Zulqara, thou hast authority, either to punish them, or to treat them with kindness. Conquered kings thronged his court, east and west he ruled, yet he sought knowledge true from a learned sage. He saw where the sun sinks from view, in a pool of mud and fetid slime. Punishment of wrongdoers. The Quranic story next gives the reader a cryptic speech by Zulqara where he says that whoever does wrong will be sent back to the Lord, i.e. killed. The Syriac legend gives a much fuller account. It explains that Alexander asked for criminals to be sent to the shore of the fetid sea to test a rumor that anyone who approaches the sea dies. When the prisoners drop dead, Alexander notes that it is good that those already guilty of death should die. Not only is there a direct parallel between the stories, but the Syriac legend helps make sense of the short and cryptic Quranic version of the story. And Alexander and his troops encamped, and he sent and called to him the governor who was in the camp, and said to him, Are there any men here guilty of death? They said to him, We have 37 men in bonds who are guilty of death. And the king said to the governor, Bring hither those evildoers. And they brought them, and the king commanded them and said, Go ye to the shore of the fetid sea, and hammer in stakes that ships may be tied thereto, and prepare everything needful for a force about to cross the sea. And the men went, and came to the shore of the sea. Now Alexander thought within himself, If it be true as they say, that everyone who comes near the fetid sea dies, it is better that these who are guilty of death should die. And when they had gone, and had arrived at the shore of the sea, they died instantly. Quran. He said, Whoever doth wrong, him shall we punish, then shall he be sent back to his Lord, and he will punish him with a punishment unheard of before. Sun rises on people with no cover. After leaving the muddy sea, the Quran tells us that Zulqara travels to the east where the sun rises. The author then conveys an odd and cryptic detail that the people living there have no covering protection against the sun. However, it gives no further explanation as to what that means. Again, the Syriac legend not only has an expanded, parallel account but it helps clarify the Quranic story. We are told that the people who live near the location where the sun enters the window of heaven, i.e. rises above the flat earth, must seek cover because the sun is much closer to the ground and its rays burn the people and animals there. So the whole camp mounted, and Alexander and his troops went up between the fetid sea and the bright sea to the place where the sun enters the window of heaven, for the sun is the servant of the Lord, and neither by night nor by day does he cease from his traveling. The place of his rising is over the sea, and the people who dwell there, when he is about to rise, flee away and hide themselves in the sea, that they be not burnt by his rays, and he passes through the midst of the heavens to the place where he enters the window of heaven, and wherever he passes there are terrible mountains, and those who dwell there have caves hollowed out in the rocks, and as soon as they see the sun passing over them, men and birds flee away from before him and hide in the caves, for rocks are rent by his blazing heat and fall down, and whether they be men or beasts, as soon as the stones touch them they are consumed. Quran. Then followed he, another way, until, when he came to the rising of the sun, he found it rising on a people for whom we had provided no covering protection against the sun. Travel to the valley between two mountains. On his final journey, the Quran tells us that Zulqara traveled to a valley between two mountains. The Syriac legend tells us that Alexander heads north and likewise arrives at a plain between mountains. Here he sets up his camp near a mountain pass. And Alexander said, Let us go forth by the way to the north, and they came to the confines of the north, and entered Armenia and Adarbaja and Inner Armenia, and they crossed over the country of Ternagios, and Beth-Pardia, and Beth-Tekil, and Beth-Drubil, and Beth-Katam, and Beth-Jabal, and Beth-Zamrat. Alexander passed through Nil these places, and he went and passed Mount Muses and entered a plain which is Bahilebta, and he went and encamped by the gate of the great mountain. Quran. Then followed he, another, way, till, when he came between the two mountains, he found upon their hither side a folk that scarce could understand a saying. Gog and Magog spoil and ravage the land. The Syriac legend then states that Alexander meets with people who live near the mountain pass. These natives tell of a tribe, the Huns, who live beyond the pass. These Huns spoil and ravage the land and then return back to their lands on the other side of the mountain. The legend identifies the first two kings of this tribe as Gog and Magog, the exact same names used in the Quranic account. Alexander said, This mountain is higher and more terrible than all the mountains which I have seen. The old men, the natives of the country, said to the king, Yea, by your majesty, my lord the king, neither we nor our fathers have been able to march one step in it, and men do not ascend it either on that side or on this, for it is the boundary which God has set between us and the nations within it. Alexander said, Who are the nations within this mountain upon which we are looking? The natives of the land said, They are the Huns. He said to them, Who are their kings? The old men said, Gog and Magog. Alexander said to the natives of that country, Have they come forth to spoil in your days? The old men answered and said to the king, May God establish thy kingdom and thy crown, my lord the king. These fortresses which have been overturned in our lands and in the lands of the Romans, have been overthrown by them have these towers been uprooted. When they go forth to spoil, they ravage the land of the Romans and of the Persians, and then they enter their own territory. Quran. They said, Ozulqari. The Gog and Magog, people, do great mischief on earth, shall we then render thee tribute in order that thou mightest erect a barrier between us and them? Build a barrier. After speaking with the people about Gog and Magog, Alexander says he will build a barrier, a wall or dam, between the people and the tribes that harass them. Both stories record Alexander proclaiming this in a speech. When Alexander had heard what the old men said, he marveled greatly at the great sea which surrounded all creation, and Alexander said to his troops, Do ye desire that we should do something wonderful in this land? They said to him, As thy majesty commands we will do. The king said, Let us make a gate of brass and close up this breach. Quran. He said, The power, in which my Lord has established me is better than tribute. Help me therefore with strength and labor. I will erect a strong barrier between you and them, made of iron and brass. Another similarity between the two stories is that the wall will be made of both iron and brass. Here the Quranic translators use different words for the second metal: lead, Yusuf Ali, copper, picthol, brass, shaker, but the connection with the Syriac legend is apparent. And Alexander commanded and fetched 3,000 smiths, workers in iron, and 3,000 men, workers in brass, and they put down brass and iron, and kneaded it as a man kneads when he works clay. Then they brought it and made a gate, the length of which was 12 cubits and its breadth 8 cubits. And he made a lower threshold from mountain to mountain, the length of which was 12 cubits. Quran. Bring me blocks of iron. At length, when he had filled up the space between the two steep mountain sides, he said, Blow with your bellows. Then, when he had made it red as fire, he said, Bring me, that I may pour over it, molten lead, brass. Cannot be breached. After constructing the barrier, the Syriac legend says that it is very difficult to penetrate and the Huns will not be able to dig under it. A similar phrase is used in the Quran to convey that the barrier is very difficult to pass. He fixed the gate and the bolts, and he placed nails of iron and beat them down one by the other, so that if the Huns came and dug out the rock which was under the threshold of iron, even if footmen were able to pass through, a horse with its rider would be unable to pass, so long as the gate that was hammered down with bolts stood. Quran. Thus were they made powerless to scale it or to dig through it. Destroyed at the end of times. An often overlooked aspect of the story of Dulquare is that it ends with a prophetic prediction of the wall being destroyed and the tribes of Gog and Magog surging and destroying everything in their path. In particular, it notes that this will occur on the day of judgment when the trumpet is blown and the people of the world are gathered together to account for their sins. The Syriac legend also ends with a similar prophecy that likewise occurs when the nations have been gathered together at the end of times. And the Lord will gather together the kings and their hosts which are within this mountain, and they shall all be assembled at his beck, and shall come with their spears and swords, and shall stand behind the gate, and shall look up to the heavens, and shall call upon the name of the Lord, saying, O Lord, open to us this gate. And the Lord shall send his sign from heaven, and a voice shall call on this gate, and it shall be destroyed and fall at the beck of the Lord, and it shall not be opened by the key which I have made for it. And a troop shall go through this gate which I have made, and a full span shall be worn away from the lower threshold by the hoofs of the horses which with their riders shall go forth to destroy the land by the command of the Lord. Quran. He said, This is a mercy from my Lord, but when the promise of my Lord comes to pass, he will make it into dust, and the promise of my Lord is true. On that day we shall leave them to surge like waves on one another, the trumpet will be blown, and we shall collect them all together. The connection with the destruction of the wall and the end of times is further explained in the classic Qur'anic tafsir by Ibn Kathir. We shall leave some of them to surge like waves, meaning mankind, on that day, the day when the barrier will be breached and these people, Ya'juj and Ma'juj, will come out surging over mankind to destroy their wealth and property. As Sudi said, that is when they emerge upon the people. All of this will happen before the day of resurrection and after the Dajjal, as we will explain when discussing the ayat, and the trumpet, will be blown. As explained in the hadith, is a horn that is blown into. The one who will blow into it is, the angel, Irafil, as has been explained in the hadith quoted at length above, and there are many hadiths on this topic. After seeing the numerous and explicit connections between the Qur'an and the Syriac legend, it is easy to agree with Van Bladel, who summaries the parallels between the two stories. Thus, quite strikingly, almost every element of this short Qur'anic tale finds a more explicit and detailed counterpart in the Syriac Alexander legend. In both texts the related events are given in precisely the same order. As it is, the correspondences shown earlier are still so exact that it is obvious in comparison that the two texts are at least connected very closely. They relate the same story in precisely the same order of events using many of the same particular details.
We shall never surrender.
In Daniel 8 of the Old Testament, we have a prophecy given to the prophet Daniel, who was with the exiles in Babylon about 500 or so BC. He was given a vision by the archangel Gabriel concerning the vision of the ram and the he-goat. The little he-goat was with the one horn coming from the west was Alexander the Great. This prophecy, this vision, stated that he would only live to 33 years old, that he would quickly conquer the known world, put an end to the ram with the two horns, that is the king of Persia, who had stretched his kingdom from his empire from the east to the west. He would only live to 33 years of age. His heirs would not inherit his kingdom. And this we see because of the fact that one of his top generals, Cassander, did in fact murder his wife Roxani and his son, heir to the throne, Alexander IV. And that his kingdom would be divided in 4 parts amongst his generals, which in fact did take place. So we see that all this was in fact predetermined by God. The one good thing that happened because of the spreading of the empire, of the Greek Empire of Alexander the Great, is the fact that he unified the language of that known world to being Greek. And we see that most of the texts of the New Testament were written in Greek. Even St. Luke, the doctor, St. Luke the evangelist, the doctor of the Apostle Paul, was Greek, and he wrote in Greek. The fact that the fish that were drawn from the Lake of Galilee after Jesus's resurrection and before his assumption, and the fish that were gathered in the Lake of Galilee were 153, and there were 7 apostles on the boat. 153 times 7 gives a number that in the Greek alphabet would mean synglironomi, using the Greek alphabet, Greek letter, synglironomi, which means co-heirs, which means co-heirs of the kingdom of God. I'll translate this for you. It says, in Greek, it says, concerning the reptilians and various races that live in the chambers of the earth underground. They're called the dirty and contemptible races of beings. I'll read it in Greek first, and then I'll translate it for you. Το γάρ έτος εκείνο, that year, αποφράξει Κύριος, ο Θεός, the Lord God will unlock tas pilas tas India, the gates that are in India, as έκλεισεν Αλέξανδρος ο των Μακεδόνων, which Alexander the Macedon, that is Alexander the Great, had closed up, και εξελεύσονται βασιλείς 72, and out will come 72 kings of those races. Άμα το λαό αυτών, from those people, τα λεγόμενα ρυπαρά έθνη, that is those dirty nations that are called dirty, which means dirty in the sight of God and of men. Τα βδελυρώματα πάσας σικασίας και δυσοδείας, the dirtiest of all of the detestable and filthy. Και διοσκοπηθήσονται εν πάσαν τη γη, and they will go into all of the earth worldwide. Εν πάσα τη γη την υποουρανό, which is under heaven. Σάρκας ανθρώπων ζώσας εστίοντας, they will eat the flesh of living human beings. Και το αίμα πίοντας, and they will drink their blood. So, to translate it again in English, in that year or in that time, the Lord God will unlock the gates or the chambers or the tombs or the underground vaults that are in India, which Alexander the Macedon, Alexander the Great, had locked up, and they will, and out will come the 72 kings of those races which are called the dirty, filthy, abominable nations, which are the dirtiest and the most abominable and the filthiest. And they will spread out throughout the world, worldwide, over the whole of the earth, under the heavens, eating the flesh of living human beings and drinking their blood. And this is supposedly to be done in the age of Antichrist, but of course there are many Antichrists even today in each generation. It's up to every Christian to see how he's going to be a thorn in the side of every Antichrist. One of the acts of Alexander the Great, which was very important, significant for mankind, and not touched upon, not learned by most people in the West, is the fact that through his travels into Asia, from Greece, through Turkey, through Babylon, through India, all the way to the people who were producing silk for material, that is China, he came across monsters, what we would call today reptilian type of beings, of various kinds, everything from mermaids to flesh-eating monsters to giants, anywhere between 6 to 11, 12 meters tall, monsters with 6 hands and 6 feet, dog-faced people, dog-headed people, the invisible demons of the forest which would come out and scream and speak at night, hairy men, a type of human beings that had hair all over their bodies, which we would call today something like the abominable snowman or the Yeti. He came across them very often. The men who had the appearance of women, that is, men without facial hair, which are, of course, the American Indians regularly don't have facial hair. And of course, centaurs, you know, the half men, half horse. And let's not forget, from antiquity, from the time of the Exodus of Moses and Joshua, when the Israelites entered into the Holy Land, they had the commandment from God to kill various peoples in that land, in those cities, and most of these people were giants. When Moses sent in his 12 spies to spy on the land that God promised them, they all came back frightened with reports that they were huge. There was no way on earth or heaven that they could fight and win against these giants. The only 2 men that were not afraid but put all their trust in God were Caleb and Joshua. And these were the only 2 men of the first of the Exodus of the Israelis of Israel, 40 years later, who did reach the Holy Land because of their faith. They never wavered. So the big cities that were given as cities of refuge were all basically the strongholds and the big cities of the Ammonites or the Rephaim. The Anakim. And one of these, of course, was where we get the story of David and Goliath. David and Goliath was 6-fingered and 6-toed, and he had a huge stance. He was a giant, and so were his brothers. So these are the types of people that, monsters, beasts, that Alexander the Great had to deal with, fight against, and he decided that he had to lock them up underground in special pyramids or caves or tunnels deep into the earth. And there were 72 kings. He came across them. He found out that there were 72 kings of these various races of monsters, and he had them locked up in various special caves, special underground caverns, and had them locked in there with bronze, painted with asbestos, built over with rocks, and covered up with pewter. And he called these the Caspian Gates. And he closed them in them all the abominable races of beasts and monsters. These were flesh-eating monsters, killing men, eating their flesh, and drinking their blood. And this reminds us, of course, of the stories of the mythology of the ancient Greeks, of the Cyclops, the one-eyed Cyclop giants who used to eat men as if they were little chicken bones, little chicken nuggets. One of these was the Iliad. This is very nicely recounted in the Iliad. I wanted you to know that this was the special significance of Alexander the Great's task in conquering whatever he conquered, was to lock up these reptilian type monsters. The ancient Indian murals of their various half man, half animal, like half elephant and half snake, half man type of beasts, monsters, who were demons in actuality, had to be locked up or killed because they were a threat to humanity. So it wasn't basically that he was power hungry and he had to conquer all these places because of his power. He had to lock up all these monster races, what we would call today reptilians. So we see that even the prophecies in the book of Daniel chapter 8 concerning this small horn that would come from the west, the ram that would beat the goat with the two horns, the goat being Persian Empire, King Darius, who had two horns, that is, spreading from the east to the west, had a special mission, and his mission was to get rid and lock up the abominable races of the demon-possessed, monstrous type of beings that were inhabiting the planet Earth. There are pyramids all over Asia, including China and Mongolia. And now that they're being discovered, it's unfortunate that people are trying to open them up, even though they shouldn't, because they don't know what's hidden inside.